Hey everybody, this is a different type of video today. We are going to be going through Galina Trefil's Facebook posts. For those of you who don't know, haven't watched my last video, Galina Trefil is a woman who lives in California who has, in March of 2025, accused her father, Dr. Jon Charles Truffle, of being a prolific serial killer. She claims he's confessed to being the Zodiac Killer and being responsible for the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, as well as hundreds of other murders, serial murders, throughout California for a span of decades. We're investigating her claims. She's posted the majority of her evidence on Facebook and other social media websites. So for this video, we are going to look through the evidence and we are going to evaluate it and see what we think. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another video. Before we get to the video today, let's make sure you are subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Let's make sure that you share this video. Share this video all over social media. I think that this is a very interesting topic, something that is unlike anything I've ever seen before, and I think people would like to see it. So let's get to it. This is Galina's first post, and the post that is the beginning of this whole story. She posted it on March 13th. She says, "My name is Galina. For so many years now, I've lived a double life, carried an impossible secret. This is not a joke. This is the cold reality which has been strictly on a need-to-know basis. Now everyone needs to know. I am the daughter of a serial killer. A serial killer who knew the identities of two other uncaught serial sex killers, Michael Fry and Julia Strnad. Dr. Jon Charles Truffle, my father, has admitted for almost a decade, giving a convincing story to being a serial killer on tape, graphically. FBPD, the Sheriff's Department, and the Mendocino County DA's office, they are all aware of the confessions. This is the secret that the authorities in Mendocino County are not sharing with the public. At this point, John is 86 years old. He's admitted to being a serial killer to roughly over a dozen people. He's asked repeatedly if only some authority would take him back to the dump site where he put the bodies. He's promised that he will point to where the bodies are if the police will only take him. They haven't been willing to do so, and he's remained, while bedridden, still free. He wants to tell his story. He actually wants to go public with his crimes. He's given his blessing to me to do this in his stead, though at times he's promised to fake being crazy if he's actually arrested. I, his daughter, have been asked by law enforcement how old he is, and I have responded to them. Well, he's almost a decade older than when I first contacted law enforcement. I've devoted my life to bringing John to justice. At this point, the DA's office has dozens of hours of him discussing his murders in intense detail, how he kidnapped, who he kidnapped, how he kept victims prisoner, sometimes for weeks at a time before killing them, how he tortured, how he killed. Though he said he began killing in the 1950s, he only really made it a habit in the summer of 1965 to approximately 1999. From 1965 onward, he admitted to murdering one person, give or take, per month. Female, male, old, young, and couple. Now, I'm just going to say, from the start here, she says at the beginning of the post that he's admitted to murdering over a dozen people. And then later in the post, she says, made it a habit in the summer of 1965 to approximately 1999. From 1965 onward, he's admitted to murdering one person per month, which is obviously, I guess technically over a dozen people, but way over a dozen people. It would be way over 100 people, way over several hundred people. The states involved are California, Virginia, Oregon, and Idaho. The outside countries are Canada, France, the Netherlands, and along the Mexican border. Most killings occurred in California, with the specified counties being San Francisco, Marin, Alameda, Lake, Mendocino, Sonoma, and one unidentified county that shares the northern Mendocino border. The fact that he's 86 should not matter in this case. There is no statute of limitations on murder, and most importantly, mostly he can give closure by saying where the bodies. He murdered my grandfather and laughed about killing two of my great-grandparents. He murdered multiple other people that, as a small child, I met back in the 1980s. When I realized he was a serial killer in January of 2012, I knew that he'd gone under the radar. Well, yeah. If I let it happen, he would probably never be caught. Instead, I decided to devote the next 13 years of my life building a case for the prosecution so the families of the dead could have the justice that they so deserve. The families deserve the opportunity to bury their daughters and sons, the opportunity while my father is still alive that he may stand in a courtroom and give an impact statement. I've contacted every jurisdiction where John admitted to murder. I've spoken to and given lengthy interviews with law enforcement over 40 times. I've provided DNA samples to law enforcement. At great personal, physical risk, I retrieved my father's diaries, wherein he discusses some of the murders. To date, law enforcement hasn't even been willing to read those diaries. I got 2 of the murder weapons, including a vial of strychnine that Jon used to keep in his medicine bag. No one's been willing to take it into custody. Last year, I was able to convince my father to cough up a few of the specific gravesite locations. The bodies of undiscovered victims are located at several places on 13 curves on Highway 20, mainly between the 4.5 and 5 mile marker. Also on the Kamcha-Ukiah Road, Jon's Albion property, and at a murder cabin in Kamchu. He acknowledged 2 of the other murder cabins located in Westport and Boonville. Murder cabin is a hell of a phrase. I asked law enforcement to put a wire on me. To date, they've not been willing to put a wire on me. This isn't a movie. I've been told that other, more recent cases take precedent over cold cases. They took Jon's DNA, but have not been willing to put it or my own volunteered DNA into CODIS. Now, I know for a fact that the Mendocino County Sheriff has issued a statement. Law enforcement's issued a statement saying that they have put it into CODIS. CODIS is the national DNA database, by the way. Over years, I built a posse, consistently mainly of 7 key people with an additional dozen or so helpers who have also devoted themselves to bringing Jon Trefil to justice. Pure warriors, and the strain has weighed on all of them. The time has come to go to public, though. I'm asking the Mendocino County community for help. My father has repeatedly said that there were many victims who actually got away, some of whom were his patients. Hitchhikers mostly, picked up from the Wills Junction, and tourists were his main victims in Mendocino County. He knew that they wouldn't be missed. If you have information, please go to the Mendocino County authorities. I'm afraid that, given the lack of DNA analysis, the case absolutely will not be solved without another surviving victims being willing to come forward. Thank you. Please share. Law enforcement has released a statement saying that they have done DNA analysis on one of the supposed deaths, and it did not come back as a match. And also that they have uploaded his DNA information to CODIS, and there has been no matches for Jon Trefil's DNA. So take that as you will. And here we have California driver's license. This is his student ID, Jon Trefil's student ID when he was at the University of Illinois for medical school. Another picture. This looks like a recent-ish picture. Another recent-ish picture with Galina and Jon. So that's the Facebook post that started it all. And it has, as of this video, 17,000 shares, 5.8 thousand comments, and 6.3 thousand likes and other interactions. So it's been getting pretty decent traction, but already from the start we could sort of see that there's some questionable things going on here. I think the biggest one is, she claims he's confessed to over a dozen murders and goes on to say that he's confessed to murders since 1965 every month, which would be way more than a dozen murders. So that's kind of an inconsistency that sort of sticks out to me. But this isn't the only Facebook post that she's posted. In fact, she's been posting on Facebook a lot. And she's been posting a lot of the evidence on this, which is what makes this case so startling to me. The situation is so startling, as this is the first time I think I have ever in my life seen someone outed on Facebook for something of this magnitude. And it just sort of keeps going, as you can see. So we're going to go through some more of these posts because she continues to post what she says is her evidence. On March 14th, she posted, "I am Galina. I'm the daughter of a serial killer and I need your help. Dr. Jon Charles Truffle, serial killer, my father, was in so many ways an extremely lonely person. He was shy, introverted, and almost completely, with only a handful of exceptions, unable to make or sustain friendships. He desperately craved long-term bonds through and very much wanted a co-killer. Over the course of 30 years of being a doctor, he was always on the lookout for one. As the former assistant chief psychiatrist at San Quentin and the psychiatrist for the Lake County Jail, he was certainly in a position to find one. He sought out and treated thousands of murderers and rapists." This sort of sounds like speculation on her part, saying he always wanted a co-killer, unless this is something that she's claiming. She doesn't directly claim that he claimed this to her, or at least not yet. So there were 2 other serial killers that he told me about, Michael Fry and Julia Strnad Hauser, who were also never caught. Both were his patients. Both would have been caught if not for his help. I've looked these 2 up, Michael Fry and Julia Strnad Hauser, and there really isn't anything about them online. So if these are 2 actual serial killers, there's no evidence being circulated online about that. I met Julia Strnad when I was about 8 years old, circa 1989. My mother had separated from my father, and in her absence, Jon became severely unhinged. We lived alone, he and I, in the seclusion of his 18.5 acre property in the Redwood Forest located in Albion, California. One day, Jon told me he had a special job for me. He had a new patient that had a multiple personality disorder, and some of the personalities being children. He wanted me to come to his office and play with her so he could observe the child personalities playing with another girl. He praised me so much for being willing to do this, calling me his little psychiatrist. He warned me, though, that the doctor-patient confidentiality was sacred, and if I ever told anyone what was said during therapy, I would go to prison for many years. The patient I met and played with was Julia Strnad. I don't know, this is sounds to me like this is a pretty terrible ethical breach on behalf of Jon. I'm not really sure that you should be having your child, and also terrible parent stuff. Sounds to me like psychiatrists should not be bringing their child in to interact with a patient. That seems to be a pretty bad ethical breach. Very soon after meeting her, Strnad began staying the night at our house in Albion 3 or so times a week. Her relationship with my father was grotesquely sexual and resulted in me being subjected to physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. I will never forget the time when, at a burn pit in our backyard, Strnad started taunting me that she would burn my chihuahua alive in front of me. It was her hobby to capture local pets, torture them to death, and hang them from trees. I don't like pet stuff, and this is going to be the last mention of any sort of animal abuse in this video. I apologize for even mentioning it, but I began screaming hysterically. My father broke off a tree branch in response. As I was beaten, Strnad sat to the side giggling. When it was over, I was so incredibly relieved because my taking that beating distracted Strnad from the prospect of killing my dog. Strnad probably told me that she would murder me 100 times at least. She also repeatedly threatened to murder my mother. My mother became so afraid of her that despite being a 4th grade teacher in Fort Bragg, she began carrying a loaded gun to school and keeping it in her classroom desk. My mother was afraid because Strnad, almost from the word go, spoke in detail of being an uncaught serial killer. According to her, she had murdered for the first time as a teenager living in Southern California. For several years, she lived and murdered in Lake County and then continued in Mendocino County. Some of the victims were stabbed to death with a special knife, which my father admitted on tape that he took from her and disposed of in the Albion River in case it had DNA on it. Some of the victims, trafficking victims, were only children. The victims in Lake and Mendocino County, however, were entirely very elderly men. Strnad worked as a caregiver, often under the table. And she came into private homes and, when entrusted with the care of patients unable to manage themselves or sometimes even unable to speak due to strokes, she essayed them, denied their medication, or overdosed them. She never said any of their names, but she did claim to have worked at the Sherwood Oaks Retirement Facility in Fort Bragg, California. She also told me many times about how one particular very frail old man was laying down so that she, a woman over 300 pounds, sat on his chest until he died. All throughout Lake Grammar School, middle school, and high school, I lived with the secret of being stalked by, abused by, and waiting for Julia Strnad to inevitably murder me too. My mother did go to the Fort Bragg Police Department to report Strnad's serial killer claims. There is a report of that visit, and my father also kept a record of the police officer's name that told her that, while he believed Strnad was claiming to be a serial killer, he could not investigate it based on her lack of saying the victims' names. I feel like that would be, if that's true, which again, take this with a massive grain of salt here, but if that's true, that is some very bad police work. The officer acknowledged that Strnad was a known PDF file with a rap sheet. She had also been married to Dale Strnad, who had been killed in a shootout after murdering a CHP officer. Still nothing happened. Strnad was not even questioned. The same Fort Bragg cop later took a job as an investigator for the Mendocino County DA's office. As a teenager, I began to be aware of just how bizarre my situation was. I was a minor facing down a child killer. Why was no one helping me? Why was the Fort Bragg PD not helping? My sense of despair intensified when Julia Strnad accused my father of SA to the California Medical Board. The investigation lasted years, and I thought, aha, someone will save me now. My father had me copy Strnad's patient files for the medical board, wherein I saw Strnad put in writing her intention to kill me. Surely the medical board would save a 16-year-old girl, but they too did nothing for me. In the middle of the night, on my 17th birthday, as I slept on the living room couch, I awoke to the sound of the front door being jostled. I heard Julia Strnad speak with a man on our front porch. That was it. She had come to murder us, me and my mother, and had the knife to do it. She just couldn't get inside. I hit the floor and crawled into my parents' room. I said what was going on, but my mother's speech was slurred. I think she had been drugged, so she couldn't get out of bed. As Strnad continued trying to break into my house through the back door, I got a gun and hid behind the couch. I did not want to die. I did not want my mother to die either. I don't know about my mother, but I know that Jon had taken out a very high life insurance policy on me. If I died, he got rich, very rich. I don't know how very rich a life insurance policy is, but I mean, even if it was $1 million, I mean, I guess $1 million at the time could be very rich, sure. I stayed up for the rest of the night, gun in hand to protect two of us, and then got ready for school the next day, very much aware that I couldn't tell anyone that I had almost been stabbed to death the night before. I did tell one person, my boyfriend, but what could he do? During the SA investigation, Julia Strnad suddenly died. Using his influence as a doctor, my father immediately got a copy of the autopsy and death certificate. He also bought a cake to celebrate. Afterwards, my father informed the medical board that she was dead, and so they could stop investigating him. Well, they didn't. Dead or not, the investigation moved forward, and Jon was ultimately stripped of his medical license. Yeah, the board isn't going to stop investigating because the complainant died. That would be a little too convenient. As I grew older, I just assumed that the documents that I copied for the medical board must have been later removed by him. There is no way that so many adults who had legal responsibility to protect a child could have long-term looked the other way. If only they had helped me, I wouldn't have to have gone through that murder attempt at 17. When my father, so many years later, gave me his diary collection, he had an entire box on Julia Strnad records, and it was beyond devastating to read that the California Medical Board and so many doctors absolutely did know about Strnad's claims about being a serial killer. And they also knew that my life, a child's life, was specifically being threatened. They knew, and they left me there in those circumstances to die. To this day, if I were ever in a room with those doctors, all I would want to know is why. Why? Why didn't I deserve to live? Didn't I deserve to not be subjected to a PDF file? How could they ignore this? I was also aghast to learn that Strnad, a regular member of the Fort Bragg Kingdom Hall, had been assigned a spiritual guide of sorts. I don't remember the exact title the woman had. This woman, whose name is also recorded by my father, was present during the therapy session in which Strnad graphically described murdering a baby girl that she had given birth to, but never registered with the state. How could any adult listen to what Strnad did to that baby and not turn the information over to the police? But she didn't. And Strnad kept attending the Kingdom Hall up until she was finally tossed out, not for child murder, but for getting drunk and streaking in town. Oh boy. Every single agency that could have brought Strnad to justice failed, probably because of the concept of a female sex killer in the 1990s. That's the term she used, sex killer. In the 1990s was so utterly bizarre. Regardless, they failed. And Jon Trefil kept all the records of that failure, the names, the dates, he held on to all of it. He seemed to have kept pretty detailed records about his murders, his alleged murders, and murdery friends. As proof of this story, I enclosed below copies of the reports of the California Medical Board, along with a photograph of myself, another child, and Strnad in a bra and panties swimming in the backyard pond on Jon Trefil's Albion property. Though her death was specifically ruled as being from natural causes, Jon has admitted that he killed her. He medicated her in such a way that would inevitably result in her death. Strnad, who was married to Fort Bragg PDF file Reginald Hauser at the time of her death, was one of Jon Trefil's final victims. She was killed because she reported him to the California Medical Board. Though Strnad is long dead, her victim's family still deserve justice. Though the Fort Bragg PD said there was nothing they could do, I challenge that. Surely someone that hired Strnad to care for their ailing family member has the right to know what could have truly happened if that person died in her care. Her face should have been plastered all over Mendocino and Lake County in the 1990s. I went to both Lake County and Mendocino County Police about this. Nothing has happened. What can you do? How can you help? Please share. The victims' families deserve to have this information shared. However belated, help them finally find justice. The Mendocino County's DA's office has a copy of every single document that my father kept regarding Julia Strnad. Every name that failed to catch her, they have a copy of. And there are some pictures here. I'm guessing this is Julia Strnad right here. And I'm guessing this is Galina. This appears to be part of the investigation into Jon Trefil. And you can see here down in the summary of case, the major concerns of this case involve several boundary violations and professional misconduct which occurred in the treatment of the patient and are admitted and documented in the records. There is also an allegation of SA, which was first reported to Laura Bellows, RN, a social worker from Mendocino County on January 15, 1997, and recorded in a consumer complaint form by Johnny Wilson, a social worker with Adult Protective Services of the Department of Social Services in Mendocino County, dated March 21st, 1997. Treatment began on April 7th, 1990, and Julia Strnad alleges sexual activity began 6 months after treatment began and that it lasted until 1996. The patient has a long history of serious emotional problems and bizarre history of traumatic childhood abuse and ongoing emotional crises. She also suffers from alcoholism and has shown a generally consistent pattern of being unreliable historian with criminal and sociopathic behavior. The records do indicate serious ethical issues in the treatment of this patient with boundary violations and extreme departures from the standards of practice, and clear evidence of professional misconduct. The patient alleges that Jon Trefil would call out her most seductive personality and then would engage in sexual activity with her. The treatment records are quite detailed, and although there are many boundary violations that are admitted to and well documented, I cannot find evidence that sexual activity was conducted by Dr. Trefil on this patient with the intent of sexual abuse. There's a mention that the patient and Dr. Trefil would exchange hugs during sessions. Number 0025, note from patient to Dr. Trefil, I've appreciated all your sincere TLC, your hugs. On June 20th, 1990, the patient writes a note stating, I don't want any hugs or nothing because I don't like being touched. I look forward to seeing you again and stomping on your feet. Dr. Trefil also notes, why did she insist I hug her at the end of the session when I made no indication to, a hug touching only at the shoulders? This represents an extreme departure from the standards of practice and would represent an extreme lack of awareness and sensitivity regarding boundary and transference, countertransference issues with such a disturbed patient who already had significant difficulty around sexual and body issues. So they find a violation for hugging, the admitted hugging of the patient, but they did not find evidence of SA, or at least in this piece of evidence, right? And this report goes on and on and on and on. And the conclusions are that Dr. Trefil demonstrated extreme and egregious boundary violations in the treatment of this patient, allowing the patient to sleep at his home weekly for a year, conducting therapy sessions at his home in his kitchen or living room with intrusions by his family, allowing the patient to do bookkeeping, breach of confidentiality, other patient's material, having a dual relationship with the patient, paying the patient a salary, giving her $1,000 to buy a car, giving the patients gifts, treating other members of the patient's family and her friends in order to get information about her from them, using information they gave her about her non-compliance with medication and confronting the patient with this information. Oh boy. Planned extra therapeutic content with the patient outside of the therapy sessions, meeting the patient in the middle of the night on a bridge while at the same time fearful the patient would murder him, hugging the patient at the end of sessions, introducing the patient to his wife and children, going to the patient's home, allowing the patient to drink beer during a session, going on a picnic with the patient, allowing another patient to store personal belongings at his home, socializing with other patients at his home, giving the patient presents such as a dog, dollhouse, and stuffed animals. It is unclear from the record as to whether any further sexual misconduct on the part of Dr. Trefil may have occurred. It says here, the following, while not directly related to the standard of practice, calls into question the judgment of rationality of Dr. Trefil. 1. Giving an 8-year-old, presumably Galina, a firearm to protect her from the possibility of being SA. So this is some evidence that substantiates her claims. Some very clear boundary violations, some very clear unethical behavior of Jon Trefil. And then this sort of goes on to show the report. This appears to be the report of the board that resulted in the suspending of his medical license. So that's a lot. And, Galina has shown some evidence here that supports some of her claims. It doesn't support that her father's a serial killer, but it certainly supports her father was a bad psychiatrist and a bad father who had some very severe ethical and personal breaches. On March 14th, Galina would write, in 1965, my parents ended their first marriage. John called this the catalyst for his killing spree to get out of control, the reason that it became the norm. My mother, Candy, I assume it's Candy. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm sorry, moved from Illinois to the Bay Area. Hey, Illinois. She was a talented singer and artist, heralded by Rolling Stone as potentially being the next Janis Joplin. She was also well known as the posh bimbo nightclub's girl in the fishbowl. John was insanely jealous and felt extremely competitive about the increasing attention she was getting. At the time, John was an Illinois medical student living in his mother's basement with lackluster grades and a major alcoholism problem. He routinely took flights from Illinois to California specifically to stalk Candy, debating whether or not he should kill her. Meanwhile, on these trips, he killed other people in the Bay Area. Sometimes he would stay with his friend and fellow asylum patient at the Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, Michael Fry's. John also had a room that he rented on Stanton Street and at another point, one in the Presidio district. For several months in either 1968 or 1969, John worked with autistic children at the Langley Porter Institute. It was around this time that he discovered rural and secluded Mendocino County and decided on it to use for his principal killing ground. Most of the victims were not actually from Mendocino County, but abducted or sedated elsewhere. Because they were not local, he knew that the people of Mendocino County would have no idea what was going on right under their noses. Below, I have attached a few of my mother's publicity pieces as well as one of her songs on YouTube. And this is just stuff about Candy, his wife. No actual evidence sort of supporting her claims other than the fact that Candy was a singer, a well-regarded singer. On March 14th, Galina writes again, people have been asking about the diary collection of Jon Trefil, pronounced Trefil. Good. I'm glad I'm pronouncing it right. Yes, it has been completely scanned for law enforcement. I look forward to the days when they ask for copies of it. And she's made some photos that purportedly have excerpts from his diaries on here. You can take this how you will. If you believe that this is an excerpt from letters that he wrote, That's great. However, there's no real proof that he wrote this letter. It's just typed next to a picture. So how you weigh this evidence, I don't know. I mean, if you believe that it's something that he said, that's great, but you don't really see any proof here that this is exactly what he said. So my zodiac sign is Sagittarius, which corresponds to my name Trefil, which translated from the Czech is from archery, a verb. It means to hit the mark. In other words, when the arrow flies towards the target, it hits the center of the target. It says, excerpt from letter written by Dr. Jon Trefil, personal diary collection. And here's another one. I've got to kill Mike. It has to look like a crazy man mugged him on the street, but I'll take my time to do it right. It may take years. I'll write off the $1,000 as a loss. He's dead. It's just a matter of time. I'll have to get rid of the body. Excerpts from Dr. Jon Trefil's personal diary collection in reference to close friend, fellow predator, Michael Fries. So this at least supposedly corroborates the $1,000 he would give. Well, I guess it was Strnad that he supposedly gave money to. So I guess he would repeatedly give $1,000 to these people. I'll kill that son of a... I'll torture his family to death. I've kept this locked inside me for 36 years. No, I'll kill him. I'll drive out to Virginia with my .38 and wipe him out. No, I won't shoot him. I'll strangle him with my hands. It finally went over the line with us calling the sheriff on saying I'm a psychopathic killer who wants to kill her. Today, wake up 6:30, read, chatted with Debbie, chatted with Judith, no trailer, no 5-day, trip, question marks, asked Susan, called Lee, okay. Ted picked it up. Mr. Hain implied, 225 tax, mother, daughter, murdered, drove back, 1.560, Judge Hamlin, small claim court, city, county of SF, California. This is just sort of seems like some sort of a notes that he wrote. I don't know. She was very busy on March 14th, obviously. Of the posse that assembled over the years to bring Jon Trefil to justice, not all of them want their identities to be made public at this time. Perhaps this will be a shock to some, but the vast majority of the posse is actually female. Women that have, for no pay or reward, dedicated themselves to battling wits and wills with the serial killer in an effort to recover the dead. Jon prefers this dynamic because he is very uncomfortable with and even afraid of men. One posse member that is comfortable with being known is Kelly Arnold. Kelly is one of the strongest, most decent, and badass women that a person could ever encounter. She's an author, has a degree in psychology, and has worked this case for about 5 years now. She's jaw-dropping, fantastic at research, and in so many ways has been my right hand. A year ago, Kelly flew across the county to interview Jon in person and walk some of the crime scenes. She's writing a book about him, which he gives his full blessing to, and I absolutely trust that it'll be done with sensitivity, kindness, and caring for the dignity of the victims and their families. She has had access to Jon's unredacted diaries and will be using quotes from them in her book. I really think that she'll just plain knock this case out of the park. Also, because she's a psychology major, Jon gave her information regarding how victims were tortured that he was thus far unwilling to give anyone else. The below photograph taken by Stephen R. was from the interview session with Jon in 2023. At that time, Kelly and I had hopes that he would reveal the location of 2 particular named victims. From our efforts, for all that we both tried, he was unwilling to say where he put them. One particular body he's decided to hold on to come hell or high water. I don't TikTok or engage in other social media forums. Kelly's the one who's been willing to. Her TikTok about this case is... and there's a TikTok link. Now, I TikTok, and you guys should follow me on TikTok. AK Bruce on TikTok. Let's watch her TikTok.
Galina Trefil's father has come out as an SK in the Northern California area. She's taken to social media to try and get attention drawn to the cases because, well, these things happened over a period of nearly 50 years, and despite having given the authorities all the information on it, nothing has really been done. She is hopeful that by going to social media, there will be a push in the right direction with the appropriate people through media, press, to further investigate this, to really get out there and bring justice for these victims. Her father was a psychiatrist and surgeon in the Northern California area, a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and most of the victims are hidden among the trees. So this is where it begins. We're going to tell the story.
I'll go through her TikTok at a later date. It seems like there's a lot more here to unpack, but this sort of seems like an introduction. We don't want to go too off the current Facebook deep dive. This appears to be a picture of Kelly and Jon. So at the very least, Kelly has definitely been in the same room as Jon and Galina Trefil. March 15th, Galina would write, "My name is Galina and I'm the daughter of a serial killer. There's a good deal of speculation going on about what kind of father he was, particularly in light of so many photographs of me smiling with him. Growing up, I loved my father very much. He terrified me, but he was all that I had, and I loved him. Yes, I could talk about the time that he almost threw me off a cliff beside the Albion Bridge when I was 4 or 5 years old. Well, that is absolutely horrible. I could talk about him having me babysat by a member of the Children of God cult around the same time. Also really bad. I could talk about a lot of things, but my abuse is not what the victims' families need to hear about. I only intend to share things regarding Jon Trefil as a father that are, as the following information is, relevant to my case. Always with family stuff, there's obviously a lot of personal hurt here. And this is obviously this abusive childhood seems to be the motivation behind these Facebook posts. Doesn't discredit it, doesn't support it either. My parents split up when I was 7. My mother, Candy, suffers from mental illness, from which she was at least twice institutionalized. Once in the same mental hospital wherein Jon himself was a patient. During her mental illness episodes, Candy would often become violent. One day, she kicked me in the spine and dragged me across a field by my hair. The next day at school, it hurt to walk, and I stayed in the nurse's office crying from the pain. My father kicked Candy out. He didn't want the attention that such a beating could result in. He didn't want another investigation. Again, child abuse is horrific, and I hate this stuff. And so there's going to be chapters to this video that you could skip if this particular entry is too much for you. Protect your mental health. At the time, my parents were already being investigated by the Mendocino County Child Protective Services. I think the investigation started around 1985 and went on until something like 1989. CPS was concerned that Jon might be a PDF file and that Candy had covered it up. The investigation was led by Michael Rice after a Fort Bragg pediatrician discovered that I was suffering from an STD. Peterson was the lawyer's name that my father hired to ultimately make the S-crime investigation go away. Peterson succeeded, but he couldn't do anything about the vast local gossip that my father had been long-term SAing me. This gossip was so extreme that I ultimately had to change schools just to get away, and I have no doubt that quite a few locals will recall the rumors to this day. Prior to the PDF investigation, the Mendocino County Sheriff's Department had, back in 1983 or so, come into Jon's home in Albion in the middle of the night and ordered my father to hand me over to them. Earlier that day, my father had been in a rage and attacked my mother and 2 older half-siblings. My mother was afraid that it had been his intention to murder the 3 of them and the family therapist. Lori Bloom urged her to contact law enforcement, in case I might also, at the age of 12, be killed. Now, Jon and Candy split up, and he had sole custody of me from that point onward for several years. Far from being upset, my mother made it clear that she was essentially glad to be rid of me. Now, here I was with Jon, alone, also in the remote Albion redwood forest. He could do anything he wanted. He had almost 20 acres of complete privacy. Jon assigned me a job to start reading books on serial killers. He had a massive collection of these, all with meaningful underlines and side notes written by him into the margins. He had every single book ever written about Ted Bundy, sometimes 2 copies, one for home and one to keep in his office in Fort Bragg. Bundy was a major touchstone for him. Now, I know a lot of people try to talk about people in true crime cases being obsessed with serial killers, but the problem is there's a lot of people who do not commit crimes that are also obsessed with serial killers. Lots of people buy, t-shirts with funny Ted Bundy and Dahmer sayings on it. And lots of people read about serial killers. Being fascinated with these people, especially as a psychiatrist, isn't really much evidence. And, the implication that evidence has sort of outweighs the actual value of it. Saying, oh, he loves serial killers. Well, that sounds really bad, but it doesn't really mean that he was a serial killer, right? Jon's library was massive, possibly containing up to 5,000 books, and he probably read 3 or 4 hours a day in that camper. Posted opposite of him on the wall, there would later be hung an 8x10 of Ted Bundy's corpse. Every day that corpse stared back at him as Jon drank his morning coffee. The best part of waking up. That Jon paid me 1 penny per page to read serial killer books actually became noticed by the Mendocino Grammar School when I was found reading a book about Ed Gein in the classroom. A district rule was passed that serial killer books were no longer allowed in grammar schools. The school did not report it to CPS that I was being made to do this. Kind of surprised that they had to pass that rule, though it seems like she was bringing the book in, not that she had gotten the book from the library or something. I somehow doubt that the Mendocino County grammar schools had serial killer books in the children's library. But what do I know? It was, in the 80s? Those were the wild west of raising children. After I would read a book, Jon would sit me down and discuss it with me in detail. He particularly wanted to talk about how serial killers got caught. Forensics were becoming a real thing in the 1980s. Jon had an intense love of chemistry and science, so I always assumed this is why he focused on the aspect of serial killing. There was never any question about whether I could refuse to read the books. Jon's word was iron in our family. The majority of the time. Jon was very soft-spoken and even gentle. It wasn't common to see him switch over to darkness, but when that did happen, there was no warning. His eyes, which were already dark brown, would go black, and his face would flush red. He was incredibly physically strong. You did what he told you to, period. As many preteens do, though, at 11 I stopped being as submissive. I actually worked up the nerve a few times to yell, to defy. Jon decided to shut this personality change right down. I was kept in a room for 3 months. I was only allowed to go to the bathroom. There were no phone calls, no TV, no letters, absolutely no contact with the outside world. I was given jugs of water, a cardboard box filled with dry top ramens, and rye crisp, nothing more. I had a pad on the floor, maybe 1.5 inches thick, a blanket, and a pillow. And there it was. He didn't speak to me. I wasn't allowed to speak to him. The room had windows. I could have escaped, easily could have. I remember staring out the window so many times, very mindful that could just run to the neighbors, but to what end? Jon had said I was bad, and so I was sent to my room. I was high-functioning autistic and took everything very literally. I'd seen on TV so many times that sending a child to their room was okay. So Jon keeping me in this room, eating crackers and drinking water, had to be okay on some level. What I deserved for fighting back. It occurred to me a lot that if I did run, I would be killed. Jon warned me hundreds of times throughout my childhood that if I wasn't essayed and murdered, I would be moved to somewhere far less present than his room. The tomb. Technically, it was a fallout shelter that Jon had designed and built after reading about something similar belonging to fellow Mendocino County serial killer Leonard Lake. Jon had hired local contractor John Shandle to help build it, paying him under the table. He moved in a homeless handyman, Frank Laws, and his wife, Sharon, to also help build. This is a lot of detail for something that happened decades ago. I'm not saying that she doesn't have fantastic memory, but, keeping in mind her background as a writer, it seems to me that there is very little memory loss here, and it almost seems like it's almost too well remembered. Jon later implied that he murdered Frank and Sharon, but then went back on the implication. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I don't know how you imply something and then go back on the implication. It seems weird. The tomb was underground. It opened up to a ladder going down maybe 5 or 6 feet. Inside, there were bunk beds constructed to look like those in a WW2 concentration camp. No blanket, no pillows, no pleasantries of any kind. The walls weren't painted. There was no tile or any other flooring, just freezing cold cement. No electricity, no running water. It was pitch black. There were bags of dry ice and water, nothing more. From the center of the ceiling, there was a pipe for air. The opening by the ladder was kept chained and padlocked shut from the outside. If I left the room that Jon had put me in, he said that I would go to live in the tomb. I knew that, at least at that point, no one would ever notice that I was gone because I was being homeschooled. All I could do was wait for the day when I would be set free. I didn't hate my father for what he did to me. Child abuse remains, for everyone that has gone through it, a deeply complicated issue. What was most important to me was that he always told me that he was only one in the family that did. My mother abandoning me made me cling to my father that much tighter because I was desperate to have one person, just one blood relative that loved me. I could endure any amount of cruelty if only the end result could be to have one family member care. Jon was hurting me the most, but at least he was physically present. No one else was. Jon had 3 rules about the tomb. Don't go near it. Absolutely do not climb the hill covered in blackberry bushes that he had put on top of it in order to ensure that helicopters wouldn't be able to find it. And 3, if I violated the first 2 rules, the important thing that I must never ever do was to look down the air pipe. The last rule always threw me because I knew that there would be nothing to see down there due to the darkness. I never disobeyed the rules though. Many years later, when Jon confessed to being a serial killer, he admitted that the tomb was constructed specifically for the purposes of keeping female victims long term prior to murdering them. One victim was kept underground there, he said, for 3 weeks before her murder. He said these women were essentially special. He became, in his word, attached to them. They were assigned names as he didn't want to call them by the real name. Because he was attached to them, they are the ones that are actually buried on the Albion property. 16 women and 2 men. He refused to say where they had abducted them from, but he's repeatedly stated that most of his victims were either not local or transported to Mendocino County, drugged from several hours away. During the period when the tomb was built, Jon regularly traveled to the Bay Area, which he'd call his home for so many years, and he would pick up hitchhikers between there and Albion. Jon claims to have taken Polaroids of the victims inside the tomb, which he buried in boxes throughout the property. There are only a few photographs of the tomb that I know of, taken during its construction. These have been shown to law enforcement. Some kinds of evidence can easily be disposed of. A 10-foot room made of solid concrete is not one of them. That's correct. This is a piece of evidence that should still be there. Still, nothing has happened. Who knows what kind of forensic evidence could be within that horrible place, just sitting there, just waiting for someone with a scientific background to do their job. So many bodies will never be found, but a blood stain with a genetic code could reveal to a family at least what happened to their loved one. They could have the closure of no longer waiting for the missing person to come home. They could properly mourn. The families of the victims deserve that. Why haven't they yet? Please share. And here are some photos of the tomb. tomb. And it looks like a basement, underground section at least of this property. Here's another photograph of Jon and presumably Galina. Here is, I guess, what it looked like, or at least one of his homes looked like. So what do you think of the evidence so far? You tell me. We've gone through it, and there's been a lot of claims made. There's been some support for the issues that he had as a psychiatrist. There has been some support that some of the people that she mentions, she's been around. But there's also the fact that law enforcement's come out and claimed to have investigated her claims and not found a lot of this stuff. Do you believe her story? Let me know in the comments. Make sure that you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. Make sure you're following me on TikTok. My username is AKBruce. If there is a spooky or disturbing story you would like me to cover, send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you would like to make a donation to the channel, there is a super thanks button that you can click and make a donation. I would appreciate it. Any money that goes to this channel is going to be put back into making better videos for you guys. I'm going to put the names of the people who have already donated to this channel here. Thank you very much. You also support me by continuing to watch my videos, liking my videos, and sharing my videos. And I deeply appreciate that. My current upload schedule is Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And I do a premiere of the videos before the videos post. So if you would like to come out and join that, it's at 7 p.m. on those days, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. You can watch the video for the first time, stream it with everyone, and live chat with me. And I'll tell you some interesting things about the video and generally other interesting facts about the case that didn't make it into the video. Thank you for watching my videos. It means a lot to me, and stay spooky.